The rain had stopped an hour ago, but the cold stayed behind like it had nowhere else to go. Renee Coleman sat on a metal bench at the edge of the park with a small paper bag in her lap and no idea how she would feed her daughter the next morning. The bag held one sandwich. Turkey and cheese on day-old bread, the last thing in her purse besides $4 crumpled and a bus pass with 2 rides left on it. She had been saving the sandwich since noon, telling herself she would eat it when her hands stopped shaking. They had not stopped. That morning she had walked into the diner where she had worked for 3 years and found her name crossed off the schedule. Hank Dolan had pulled her aside, eyes on the floor, and told her he could not keep her on. Costs had gone up. The lunch crowd had thinned. He was sorry. He said the word sorry 4 times, and not one of them paid her rent. So she sat. The city moved past her in coats and umbrellas, faces lit blue by phone screens, all of them in a hurry to be somewhere warm. Renee watched them and tried to do the math that would keep a roof over Joy. The numbers would not add up no matter how she moved them around. That was when she noticed the man. He sat at the far end of the same bench, though she had not seen him arrive. He was older, maybe 60, with a gray beard gone wild and a coat that had been a coat a long time ago. His shoes were split at the toe. His hands were red and raw, folded against his chest like he was trying to hold his own warmth inside. He was shivering in long slow waves, the kind a body does when it has been cold for hours and given up on getting warm. People walked right past him. Renee watched a man in a fine wool coat step around him without a glance, like the bench held nothing at all. A young couple laughed and crossed to the other path. A woman in heels checked her watch and never looked up. Renee had seen this before. She knew what it was to be a person the world decided not to see. She looked down at her sandwich. One sandwich. Her last meal until who knew when. Then she stood, walked the length of the bench, and sat down beside the stranger. "Evening," she said. He turned, slow, surprised. His eyes were a soft gray and clearer than she expected. "Evening," he answered, his voice rough from cold. Renee opened the paper bag. She took out the sandwich, peeled back the wrapper, and tore it down the middle as evenly as her shaking hands would let her. She held one half out to him. "It's not much," she said. "It's day old. But it's good. Hank uses real turkey." The man stared at the half sandwich like he had forgotten what food looked like when someone offered it instead of throwing it away. "I can't take your supper," he said. "You can," Renee said. "And you will." "I don't like to eat alone, and neither should you." He took it. His hand trembled when he did. He ate slowly, in small careful bites, like a man who had learned that food does not always come again soon. Renee ate her half beside him and did not ask him a single question. She did not ask his name, or how he came to be on that bench, or whether he had anyone. She figured a man that cold did not need an interview. He needed to not be alone for 10 minutes. So they sat, 2 strangers under a sky the color of wet stone, and they ate. When the last bite was gone, the man wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Why?" he said quietly. "Why what? Why did you stop?" "Nobody stops." Renee looked out at the park. "Because I know what it feels like to be looked through," she said. "I lost my job this morning. I've got $4 and a little girl at home who thinks her mama can fix anything." She let out a small tired laugh. "Funny day to be the one giving things away." The man was quiet for a long moment. "Your little girl is lucky," he said. "She's the lucky thing in my life," Renee said. "Her name is Joy. She earns it." She stood and gathered the empty bag. "You take care of yourself, all right. Find somewhere warm tonight. Promise me that much." "I promise," he said. She set a hand on his shoulder, just for a second, the way you would steady someone. Then she walked toward the bus stop, coral scarf pulled tight against the cold, and she did not look back. The man watched her go until she was gone into the gray. His name was Salvatore Russo, and everything she believed about him was wrong. He was not homeless. He had not missed a meal in 40 years that he had not chosen to miss. He owned a company worth more than the entire neighborhood she lived in, and the split shoes on his feet had been bought that morning for exactly this purpose. He had spent the whole day pretending to be poor, walking the streets of his own city to learn one thing about it. In a city of millions, hundreds of comfortable people had looked straight through him. Only one had stopped. Only one had sat down. Only one had given him the last food she had, on the worst day of her own life, and asked for nothing back. He looked down at the bench where her hand had rested on his shoulder. On the wood beside him she had left the crumpled paper bag, and on it, written in pen in a child's careful hand, were the words "Mommy's lunch, eat it all." Joy had packed it for her. And Renee had given it to him instead. Sal folded the bag and put it inside his ragged coat, close to his chest. He did not know her last name. He did not know where she lived. He knew only that her name was Renee, that her daughter was named Joy, and that he was going to find her if it took him the rest of his life. Stop for a second before you go on. She had $4 to her name. She had a 6-year-old waiting at home. She had every reason in the world to keep that sandwich for herself, and she gave half of it to a stranger she thought had nothing. Ask yourself honestly, would you have stopped at that bench, or would you have walked past like everyone else? If a small act of kindness still means something to you, subscribe and stay with this story to the very end, and tell me in the comments what you would have done. I really want to know. Because what Sal does next is going to surprise you. Frank Bruno was waiting 3 blocks away in a plain black car, exactly where he had been told to wait, and he had not liked 1 minute of it. Sal climbed into the back seat in his torn coat and split shoes, and Frank turned around with the look of a man who had been worrying for 9 hours straight. "You're frozen through," Frank said. "I told you this was a bad idea. One of these years somebody's going to do worse than ignore you." "Somebody did do worse than ignore me," Sal said. "Somebody stopped." Frank's eyebrows went up. He started the car and pulled into traffic. "Stopped how?" Sal told him. He told him about the woman in the coral scarf who sat down beside him when the whole city had stepped around him. He told him about the sandwich torn in half, about the $4, about the little girl named Joy, about the bag with the words written on it in pencil. By the time he finished, the car had gone quiet in the way a room goes quiet when something true has been said in it. "You know what today is," Sal said. "I know what today is," Frank answered. "Same day it always is." It was the day Sal's mother had died, 11 years before. Teresa Russo had come to this country with nothing but a cardboard suitcase and a name nobody could spell. She had told her son 1,000 stories about those first years, when the cold was its own kind of hunger and people crossed the street rather than look at a poor immigrant girl. But she always told one story more than the others. The story of the day a woman fed her when she had not eaten in 2 days, and gave her a coat off her own back, and asked her nothing. "My whole life," Teresa used to say, "I was invisible to everyone but one person. One person saw me. That is how I lived." Never forget there are people like that still out there, Salvatore. Find them. They are worth more than anything you will ever buy. So every year, on the day she died, Sal kept his promise. He put on the worst clothes he could find and he walked his own streets as a stranger, looking for the kind of person his mother swore still existed. For 11 years he had walked, and for 11 years the answer had been the same. People hurried past. People looked through him. Some were not cruel. Most were simply busy, or tired, or afraid, the way people are. 11 years, and not one person had stopped. Until tonight. "She had less than anybody who walked past me all day," Sal said, looking out the window at the wet city lights sliding by. "And she gave me the only thing she had. She didn't know who I was. She'll never know what it meant." He turned the paper bag over in his hands. "I need to find her, Frank. Frank glanced at him in the mirror. In 30 years he had seen Sal Russo build an empire, bury a mother, and turn a family business away from every dark thing it used to be and into something his mother could be proud of. He had never once seen him look the way he looked right now. Like a man who had found something he had stopped believing was real. "All I've got is a first name and a kid's name," Sal said. "Renee. Daughter named Joy. She got off at the 8th Street stop. She lost a job this morning at a diner." Frank nodded slowly. "That's more than nothing," he said. "That's a thread we can pull." "Pull it gently," Sal said. "I don't want to frighten her. I don't want her thinking she's in trouble. A woman like that, proud, careful, she'll run if we come at her wrong." He looked down at the words on the bag again. "Mommy's lunch, eat it all. When we find her the right way. I want to give back 10 times what she gave me, and I want her to be able to take it with her head up." "You know most people would just send a check," Frank said. "She's not most people," Sal said. "A check would insult her. I saw her face. She'd give the check away too." He almost smiled. "No. I'm going to do this so she never has to feel small for accepting it. That's the only way I'll do it at all." The car rolled on through the dark wet streets toward the warm towers of the city center, where Sal Russo lived in a glass apartment at the top of everything, alone. He looked back once toward the park, though it had long since dropped out of sight. Somewhere out there a woman was riding a bus home to a hungry little girl, with $4 in her purse and no idea that the cold stranger she had pitied was about to change the entire shape of her life. Sal closed his eyes and made his mother a new promise. He was going to find Renee. And when he did, he was going to make sure that the kindest person in the whole city never went to bed afraid again. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a tired brick building, and the radiator only worked when it felt like it. Renee climbed the stairs slowly because the elevator had been broken since spring, and because she did not want Joy to see her come through the door looking the way she felt. By the time she reached number 412 she had her face fixed. "Mommy." Joy hit her at the knees the second the door opened, a small warm bundle in a yellow dress 2 sizes too big, a dress Renee had bought big on purpose so it would last. Joy was 6 and sturdy and serious about the things she loved, and she loved her mother more than anything in the world. "Hey, baby," Renee said, scooping her up. "Were you good for Miss Camille?" "I was so good," Joy said. "We made paper birds. Did you eat your lunch? I packed it for you." Renee's throat went tight. "I sure did," she said. "Every bite. It was the best lunch I ever had." Camille Foster came out of the little kitchen drying her hands on a towel. She was Renee's age, 2 doors down, the kind of neighbor who had become family without anyone deciding it on purpose. She took one look at Renee's face and knew. "Joy, honey," Camille said, "go get the birds to show your mama. The ones on the windowsill." Joy ran off. Camille lowered her voice. "What happened?" "Hank let me go," Renee said. "This morning. Costs, the crowd, all of it. He cried more than I did." She set her purse on the counter and did not open it because she already knew what was inside. "Rent's due in 9 days. I've got $40 in the bank and 4 in my pocket." Camille closed her eyes for a second. "You'll find something. You always do." "I will," Renee said, because she had a daughter in the next room and she was not allowed to believe anything else. "I'll be at every diner and store within 10 blocks by tomorrow morning. Somebody's hiring. They always need somebody." What she did not say was that she had already done that math too, and that even if she found work the next day, the first paycheck would come too late for the rent that was due. She did not say it because saying it made it real, and because Camille had her own troubles. Everyone in the building did. For 3 months a man named Gerald Voss had been coming around. He worked for whoever owned the building now, some company that had bought it from the old owner and never showed a single human face. Voss wore good suits and a thin smile, and he had a way of finding new fees. A fee for the broken elevator that never got fixed. A fee for late rent that arrived the very day it was due. A fee for a parking lot half the tenants did not use. The fees fell hardest on the people who could least pay them, which Renee had come to understand was the whole point. People who could not pay would leave. People who left meant empty apartments. Empty apartments meant the building could be sold again, fixed up, and rented to people with more money than anyone on the fourth floor would ever see. Camille had gotten a fee notice that week too. So had the Garcia family on 3. So had old Mr. Whitfield, who had lived in the building 40 years. "You hear about Voss," Camille said quietly. "He came by while you were out. Slid a paper under your door." Renee found it on the floor by the entry. A late fee, $120, on rent that was not even due yet, with a note at the bottom that said failure to resolve outstanding charges may result in proceedings to recover the unit. She read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in the drawer with the others, where she kept the things she could not fix today but would not let beat her. "Mama, look." Joy came running with a fistful of paper birds, blue and red and yellow, folded with great care and only a little crooked. "This one's the daddy. This one's the mama. This little one is me." Renee knelt down and took the little crooked bird in her hand like it was made of glass. Joy's father had been gone 2 years now. Andre Coleman had been a good man and a careful one, a construction worker who wore his safety harness even when the other men teased him for it. None of it had saved him the day a scaffold gave way on a job 3 states over. The insurance had paid for the funeral and not much more. Renee had been carrying the rest by herself ever since. "It's perfect," Renee told her daughter. "Every single one of them is perfect." That night, after Joy was asleep, Renee sat at the kitchen table and counted the coins from the jar over the stove. $3.80 in nickels and dimes. She added it to the 4 in her purse and the 40 in the bank, and she let herself feel the fear for exactly 5 minutes, because 5 minutes was all she allowed herself. Then she wiped her face, got out a pen and paper, and made a list of every place she would walk into the next morning to ask for work. She did not think once about the cold man on the bench. She had given what she could and let it go, the way she let most things go, because a person who held on to every hard thing would never have a hand free to carry the next one. She had no idea that 3 miles across the city, in a glass apartment at the top of a tower, that same man was sitting up late looking at a coffee-stained paper bag, trying to find her. It took Frank Bruno 2 days. He started where Sal told him to start, at the 8th Street bus stop, and he worked outward in slow circles the way you do when you respect a thing and do not want to break it. He did not flash money. He did not ask hard questions. He went into diners and asked, friendly, whether they had lost a good worker lately, a woman named Renee, because a friend of his was hiring and had heard she was looking. On the second day a tired man at a corner diner looked up from a grill and said, "You mean Renee Coleman?" Hank Dolan put down his spatula and came around the counter, and he did not smile. "Why are you asking about Renee?" he said. "She in some kind of trouble?" "No trouble," Frank said. "The opposite. Somebody wants to do right by her." Hank studied him a long moment, then seemed to decide Frank was telling the truth. "She's the best worker I ever had," he said. 3 years, never late, kindest hands in the place. "I had to let her go Tuesday morning and it about killed me. Costs went through the roof, the lunch crowd dried up, I couldn't make payroll. I cut her and I cut myself, and it still might not be enough to keep the doors open." He shook his head. "If you've got work for her, real work, you give it to her. She's got a little girl. She deserves better than the hand she's been dealt." "What's the girl's name?" Frank asked, already knowing. "Joy," Hank said. "Renee talks about her like the sun comes up because of her." Frank thanked him and left, and in the car he made one phone call. "Found her," he told Sal. "Renee Coleman. Fired Tuesday from a diner on Carver Street. Owner's a decent man, just drowning. She's got the girl, Joy, like you said. I can have her address inside the hour. That afternoon Sal sat in his office at the top of his tower and read the file Frank put together, and the more he read the quieter he got. Renee Coleman, 31 years old. Widow. Husband Andre, killed in a job site accident 2 years prior. One daughter, Joy, age 6. An apartment on the 4th floor of a building on Mercer Street, a building Sal recognized, because Sal made it his business to know who owned what in his city, and the company that owned that building had a bad name. They bought up old buildings, squeezed the tenants out with fees and pressure, and flipped them empty. The agent on the ground was a man named Gerald Voss. Sal set the file down and looked out the window at the city far below. The woman who had given him her last meal was about to be pushed out of her own home by the kind of man Sal had spent 20 years cleaning out of his own company. The whole thing fit together in his chest like a key in a lock. "Frank," he said into the phone. "I want everything on the Mercer Street building. Who owns it, who really owns it under the shell, every fee they've charged, every tenant they've pushed out. Get me the housing records. Get me an honest inspector. And get me a forensic accountant, the best one we use." "You planning to buy the building?" Frank asked. "Maybe," Sal said. "But that's later. First thing comes first." He stood and reached for his coat, a good one this time, deep maroon, the kind of coat that fit. "First I'm going to go knock on her door." "As yourself," Frank said. "As myself," Sal said. "She gave me half her supper when she thought I had nothing. The least I owe her is the truth about who she was kind to." Frank was quiet a moment. "And if she slams the door?" Sal almost smiled. "Then I'll stand in the hallway and keep talking until she opens it again," he said. "But she won't slam it." "You didn't see her, Frank. People like that don't slam doors. They open them. That's the whole problem with them. That's why somebody has to look out for them." He took the elevator down 60 floors, got into the car, and rode across the city toward Mercer Street with a coffee-stained paper bag in his pocket and a plan in his head to give back, 10 times over, what one kind woman had given a stranger on a bench. Renee had spent the whole day walking and asking, and the answer everywhere had been the same gentle no. "Not hiring. Just filled the spot. Try us next month." By evening her feet ached and her list was full of crossed-out names, and she came up the 4 flights of stairs with a half loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter that had cost her almost the last of her cash. She had just gotten Joy fed and into pajamas when someone knocked on the door. Renee's stomach dropped. A knock at this hour usually meant Voss, or one of his papers. She told Joy to stay on the couch with her birds, smoothed her shirt, and opened the door with her chin already up. The man in the hallway was not Voss. He was tall, gray at the temples, in a deep maroon coat that fit him like it had been made for him, because it had. His face was clean now, his beard trimmed, his eyes a soft clear gray. For a second Renee did not place him at all. Then she did, and her hand went to her mouth. "It's you," she said. "The man from the bench." "It's me," Sal said. "My name is Salvatore Russo. I owe you a great deal more than a thank you, and I'd like the chance to say it properly. May I come in for a moment? I won't stay long, and your neighbor is welcome to sit right here with us if it makes you easier." Renee stood frozen in the doorway. The cold ragged man she had pitied was standing in her hallway in a coat worth more than a year of her rent, looking healthy and warm and entirely real. Her mind raced through it. She had given that man half her last meal. She had touched his shoulder and told him to find somewhere warm. "You weren't homeless," she said slowly. "No," Sal admitted. "I wasn't. And I'm going to tell you exactly why I was on that bench, because you deserve the whole truth. But I'd rather not tell it standing in a hallway." He paused. "I'm not here to embarrass you. I'm not here to take anything. I'm here because you were the only person in this entire city who stopped, and I am not the kind of man who lets a thing like that go unanswered." Renee looked at him a long moment. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. "Joy," she said, "we have a guest. Mind your manners." Sal stepped inside the small warm apartment and seemed, for a man who owned half the skyline, almost shy in it. Joy studied him from the couch with the frank stare of a 6-year-old. "Are you Mommy's friend?" she asked. "I hope to be," Sal said. "Your mother did something very kind for me a few days ago. I came to say thank you." He sat where Renee pointed, and he told her everything. He told her about his mother who came to this country with nothing, about the woman who fed her when she was starving and gave her a coat and asked her nothing. He told her about the promise, about the one day a year he walked his own streets as a stranger, about 11 years of being looked through, and about the night a woman in a coral scarf sat down beside him and tore her last sandwich in half. "You were the only one," he said. "In 11 years. You, on the worst day of your own life, with $4 and a little girl at home. You gave me the one thing you had left and you asked me for nothing." He took the folded paper bag from his pocket and set it gently on the table. "Mommy's lunch, eat it all. I've carried this with me since that night." Renee's eyes filled. She had not cried once through the whole hard week, not over the job, not over the fees, not over the $4. She cried now, quietly, with her hand over her mouth. "I'm not going to insult you with a check," Sal said. "You'd give it away. I know you're kind, I was raised by your kind. So here is what I am offering, and I am asking you to take it the way you'd want someone to take your kindness. Take it with your head up. There is no shame in it. You earned it the moment you sat down on that bench." He laid it out plain. A job, a real one, in his company's community office, work she could be proud of and good at. A lease paid up so she and Joy could breathe. A safe path forward, with her dignity whole. Renee wiped her face. Her grandmother Pearl had taught her one thing above all others. When kindness is offered with a clean heart, you take it and you say thank you, because refusing a true gift is its own kind of pride. Renee had given freely on that bench. Now she let herself be given to. "Thank you," she said. "I accept. With my whole heart, Mr. Russo, thank you." "Sal," he said. "Just Sal." Joy climbed down off the couch, walked over, and handed him the little crooked paper bird. "This one's for you," she said. "It's the daddy bird. We didn't have one." Sal Russo, who had buried his mother and built an empire and not wept at either, held a crooked paper bird in his large hand and could not speak for a moment. "Take a breath here. A man with everything spent 11 years looking for one kind person, and the woman who finally stopped for him was the one who had the very least to give. Before you go any further, ask yourself this. When was the last time you stopped for a stranger, even when your own life was hard? If this story is reaching something in you, do me a favor and subscribe so you do not miss how it ends, and drop a comment telling me about a time someone showed you kindness when you needed it most. I read every one. Because what happens to Renee and Joy from here is the part nobody sees coming. Renee started work on a Monday, in a bright office on the ground floor of one of Sal's buildings, and she made up her mind on the first morning that she would be worth every dollar. The job was real. That mattered to her more than anything. She worked in the community office of the Russo Foundation, the part of Sal's company that put money back into the neighborhoods the rest of the city forgot. Her work was to sit with people who came in scared and tired, the way she had been scared and tired, and to help them find the door out. Rent help. Job training. A warm meal program. She was good at it from the first hour, because she had lived every story that walked through the door, and people could feel that she had. "You hired me because of the bench," she said to Sal once, early on, half teasing and half checking. "I hired you because you're the best person in this building at this job," Sal said. "The bench is how I found you. Your worth is how you keep the chair." He paused. "Though I won't pretend the bench wasn't the luckiest day of my life." Sal did not take over her life. That was the thing Renee had braced for and the thing that never came. He paid the lease so she and Joy had a steady home, but he let her keep her own apartment on Mercer Street rather than moving her into something fancy she had not chosen. He set up a college fund for Joy and then never mentioned it again. He helped Hank Dolan too, quietly, with a low-cost loan and a contract to cater meals for the Foundation's programs, so the diner that had been drowning found steady ground and Hank kept his doors open and hired 2 of his old staff back. When Renee thanked him for Hank, Sal only shrugged and said a man who cried over letting go of a good worker was a man worth saving. The weeks turned warmer. Joy started a new school within walking distance, and on Fridays Sal would sometimes come by the office at the end of the day and the 3 of them would walk to the park, the same park, and sit on a bench that was not the bench but was close enough to make them both smile. Joy took to Sal the way children take to people who are honest with them. She told him everything. She told him about the birds and the kids at school and the gap where her front tooth used to be. Sal listened to all of it with his whole attention, the way he listened in a boardroom, and Joy decided he was the best grown-up she knew besides her mother. "He's a good man, isn't he?" Camille said one evening, watching from the window as Sal walked Renee and Joy back from the park. "You can always tell by how the small ones act around them." Joy lights up. "He is," Renee said. "He's kind in a way that doesn't ask for anything back. I keep waiting to find the catch." She smiled a little. "There isn't one. I checked." What grew between Renee and Sal grew slowly and did not need to be named yet. It was in the way he saved her the chair by the window, in the way she started keeping his coffee order in her head, in the way both of them found reasons to stay a few minutes longer at the end of a Friday. Neither of them said anything out loud. Renee had loved one good man and lost him, and she was careful with her heart. Sal had spent his life keeping people at a distance, and he was clumsy at letting one close. But the careful thing between them was warm and steady and real, and they both knew it was there. One Friday evening, on the bench by the park, with Joy chasing pigeons a safe distance off, Renee said the thing she had been carrying. "There's something happening at my building," she said. "And I think it's about to get worse for a lot of good people. I didn't want to bring it to you. You've already given us so much. But these are my neighbors, Sal. Mr. Whitfield's been there 40 years. The Garcias have 3 kids. Camille is the only reason I survived this winter. And a man named Gerald Voss is squeezing every one of them out with fees they can't pay so somebody can sell the building empty." Sal had known it was coming. He had been waiting for her to ask, because he wanted her to be the one to choose to fight rather than have him fight over her head. "Tell me everything," he said. "Every fee, every notice, every name." Renee told him. And Sal listened, and when she was done he sat quiet for a long moment looking out at the children in the park. "Renee," he said. "I want you to understand something about how I do things now. There was a time, before my mother passed, when my family handled problems in ways I'm not proud of. I burned all of that down. Everything we do now, we do in the daylight, by the book, with paper and law and patience. It's slower. It's harder. But it lasts, and nobody can ever take it back from you." He turned to her. "We're going to help your neighbors. And we're going to do it so cleanly that Gerald Voss never gets up again." "How?" Renee asked. Sal almost smiled. "Records," he said. "Numbers. An honest inspector and a very good accountant. Men like Voss always think nobody's reading the fine print. We're going to read every word." Gerald Voss did not like the woman from 412. He had a system, and the system worked because the people it worked on were too tired and too scared to do anything but pay or leave. The fees did the job for him. A late charge here, a maintenance charge there, a parking charge for spaces nobody could prove they did not use. The trick was to keep each one small enough that fighting it cost more than paying it, and to send enough of them that the total broke a person's back. Within a year a full building emptied out, and the owners he reported to could sell it clean and start again somewhere else. But the woman from 412 had stopped paying quietly and started asking questions. She knocked on doors. She got the Garcias and old Mr. Whitfield and the foster woman from 410 to keep every notice they had ever received instead of throwing them away. She made a list, a careful one, of every fee charged to every tenant going back 2 years, and she did it on her own time with the patience of someone who had nothing left to lose and had decided to win anyway. Voss tried the usual pressure. He sent her a notice threatening proceedings to recover the unit. She did not flinch. He came to her door himself, with his thin smile, and told her in a low voice that tenants who made trouble had a way of finding their applications denied at every other building in the city, that he would hate to see a single mother and her little girl out on the street over a misunderstanding. Renee looked him in the eye and said, "Mr. Voss, you can take your hat and go. I've been hungry and I've been afraid and I'm not either one anymore. You charged Mr. Whitfield a $400 elevator fee for an elevator that hasn't worked since spring. I've got the notice and I've got the date the elevator broke and I've got 40 years of that man's rent receipts. You should go on home and think hard about which one of us is in trouble." Voss left. For the first time in a long career, he felt the floor tilt under him. What he did not know was that the careful list in 412 had already left the building. Renee had brought it to Sal, and Sal had handed it to people whose whole job was reading fine print. A forensic accountant named Patricia Reyes spent 2 weeks tracing the building's money. She followed it out of the tenants' pockets, through the management company Voss worked for, through 3 shell companies stacked on top of each other, and into the bank account of the man who actually owned the building, a man who had spent years hiding behind those shells so that nobody could connect the fees on Mercer Street to his name. Meanwhile, an honest city housing inspector, a careful older woman named Gloria Banks who had spent 30 years and refused every envelope ever slid across a table to her, walked the Mercer Street building floor by floor. She wrote down the broken elevator, the cold radiators, the leak on the second floor that had been there a year, the fee notices taped to doors. She matched every charge Voss had ever sent against the actual condition of the building, and the gap between what the tenants were charged and what they got was wide enough to drive a truck through. Sal read the reports at his desk and felt the old cold patience settle over him, the patience that had let him take apart bigger men than Gerald Voss. "He's been charging people for repairs he never made," Patricia Reyes told him. "Hundreds of them, across 6 buildings, going back years. It's fraud. Plain, provable, written down in their own paperwork. The inspection backs up every number. This isn't a gray area. This is a man who thought nobody would ever read the file." "And the owner behind the shells?" Sal asked. "His name comes off clean once we lay the companies side by side," she said. "He's done this in 4 cities. He's never been caught because nobody ever put the pieces together. We just did." Sal sat back in his chair. Through the glass wall of his office the city spread out below him in the bright clean light of afternoon, all of it ordinary and unaware. "Then we put it where it belongs," he said. "Housing Authority. The District Attorney's Office. Every reporter in this city who's ever written about renters getting pushed out of their homes. We hand them a clean file with every number proved twice, and we let the daylight do the rest." He looked at the photo on his desk, the one Frank had taken without him noticing, of Renee and Joy laughing on the bench by the park. "And I want Renee Coleman's name on none of it where Voss can see it. She started this fight. She is not going to be the one who pays for it." "Understood," Patricia said. Sal stood and looked out at his city. For most of his life he had solved problems in the dark, the old family way, and he had walked away from all of it because his mother asked him to and because the dark left a stain that never washed out. This was the other way. The slow way. The way that left your hands clean and your conscience quiet and could never, ever be taken back. It was the only way he wanted Renee to ever see him work. "Tell Renee," he said quietly. "Tell her the daylight is coming. Tell her nobody in that building is losing their home. It did not happen with shouting. The best things rarely do. It happened with paper. A thick clean file landed on 3 desks on the same Tuesday morning: the housing authority, the district attorney, and a reporter at the city paper who had spent her whole career writing about families pushed out of their homes and had never once been handed proof this complete. The file laid it all out. Every fee. Every repair that was charged for and never made. Every shell company. The name of the man who had been hiding behind them. And the careful, patient inspection that backed up every single number. Gerald Voss heard about it the way men like Voss always hear about it: too late. The management company he worked for cut him loose within a day, the way a sinking boat throws off weight. The owner behind the shells, a man named Donald Pell who had done the same trick in 4 cities and never paid for it once, found his name on the front page of the paper under a headline about renters being cheated out of repairs they paid for. The district attorney announced an investigation by Friday. Donald Pell would spend the next 2 years in courtrooms and the rest of his life unable to buy a building in that city, and every fee he had ever charged the people of Mercer Street would be ordered paid back, with interest, by law. Voss himself was finished in the only way the law allows, which is to say he was exposed, named, barred, and made to give back what he took. There was no weapon in any of it. There was no threat. There was only the patient daylight of numbers that did not lie, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was the kind of ending that could never be undone. On Mercer Street, the tenants did not just keep their homes. The court ordered the building brought up to code. The elevator was fixed within a month, the first time it had run since spring. The radiators got warm. The leak on the second floor got patched. Old Mr. Whitfield got a check for the elevator fee he never should have paid, and he framed the letter that came with it and hung it by his door. The Garcia children slept in a warm apartment for the first winter in years. And Camille Foster, who had carried Renee through the worst season of her life, knocked on the door of 412 with tears in her eyes and said, "We won. Renee, we actually won." "We did," Renee said, holding her friend in the doorway. "Every one of us." That Friday, on the bench by the park, with Joy asleep against Renee's shoulder after a long happy day, Sal finally said the thing that had been growing between them since the night a stranger tore a sandwich in half. "I've spent my whole life keeping people at arm's length," he said, looking out at the dark trees. "It was safer that way. Easier. My mother used to tell me I'd build the tallest tower in the city and live in it alone, and she was right, and it never bothered me until the night you sat down on that bench." He turned to her. "You gave me the only thing you had when you thought I had nothing. I've been trying to give it back ever since, and the truth is I gave you a job and a lease and a fight worth winning, and you gave me back something I'd given up on. You gave me a reason to come down out of the tower." Renee's heart was full and steady. She had loved Andre, and that love would always have a room in her where the light stayed on. But hearts are not so small that they only hold one thing, and what she felt for the man beside her had grown true and warm in her own. "My grandmother had a saying," Renee said. "She used to tell me, when somebody good shows up in your life, you don't make them stand outside in the cold while you decide. You open the door." She looked at him. "I'm opening the door, Sal." He took her hand, careful as a man holding something he had waited a long time for, and they sat on the bench in the bright clean light of the street lamps while Joy slept on, and neither of them needed to say anything else. What they did not know, what neither of them could have known, was that the door Renee had just opened had been built 60 years before, by 2 women who had never met them and never would, on a cold street in a city that had forgotten both their names. It started with a box. Sal had been clearing out a storage room in his mother's old house, the small house in the old neighborhood that he had never been able to sell, the house where Teresa Russo had lived even after her son could have bought her a mansion, because she said a mansion would make her forget where she came from. In a closet, behind boxes of photographs, Sal found a coat. It was an old coat, a woman's coat, deep red wool worn soft and thin at the elbows. He had never seen it before. Tucked in the pocket was a photograph, cracked at one corner, of 2 young women standing in front of a small storefront kitchen, arms around each other, laughing at something outside the frame. One of the women was his mother, young, thin, no older than 20. The other was a black woman about the same age in an apron, with a wide warm smile and kind eyes. On the back, in his mother's careful handwriting, were the words, "Pearl, who saved my life." The coat is hers. I could never give it back. I keep it so I never forget. Sal stood in the cold storage room and felt the whole world quietly rearrange itself. He had grown up on the story. The starving girl, the woman who fed her and gave her a coat off her own back and asked her nothing. His mother had told it 1,000 times and never once said the woman's name, because by the time Sal was old enough to ask, she could not remember it, only the kindness. Pearl. He turned the photograph over and over. The storefront in the background had a hand-painted sign. He could just make out the words. Pearl's Kitchen, Mercer Street. Mercer Street. Sal sat down on a box because his legs would not quite hold him. It took Frank 3 days to run it down, working from the photograph and the name and the address, pulling old records the way he had once pulled the thread that led to Renee. He came back to Sal's office with a thin folder and a strange look on his face. Pearl's Kitchen, Frank said. Mercer Street. Closed 40 years ago. The woman who ran it was named Pearl Coleman. He set the folder down. She fed people, Sal. For 30 years. Anybody who came through that door hungry got fed, money or no money. The whole neighborhood knew her. She gave away more food than she ever sold. She had a daughter, and the daughter had a son. He paused. And that son had a daughter. Sal already knew. He had known the second he saw the name. But he made himself ask. What's her name? The granddaughter. Renee, Frank said quietly. Renee Coleman. The room went very still. Sal looked at the photograph of the laughing girl in the apron, Pearl, who had saved a starving immigrant's life on Mercer Street 60 years before, and he understood that nothing about the bench had been chance. The kindness that had stopped for him on the worst night of one woman's life had not come out of nowhere. It had come down through 3 generations of the same family, passed hand to hand like the warm coat in his arms. Pearl had fed his starving mother. And 60 years later, on a cold bench, Pearl's granddaughter had torn her last meal in half for a stranger she thought had nothing, never knowing the stranger was the son of the very woman her grandmother had once saved. That evening Sal drove to Mercer Street, climbed 4 flights of stairs because he wanted to, and knocked on the door of 412. Renee opened it in an emerald sweater with joy on her hip. I need to show you something, he said, and his voice was not quite steady. Can I come in? He laid the photograph on the kitchen table. He told her the whole story, his mother's story, the starving girl and the woman who fed her, and then he turned the photograph over so Renee could read the words in his mother's hand. Pearl, who saved my life. Renee stared at the laughing young woman in the apron and her hand went to her mouth, because she knew that face. She had a copy of the same photograph in a shoebox in her closet, handed down from her own father, of her great-grandmother Pearl who had run a kitchen on Mercer Street and fed the whole neighborhood and never let a hungry soul leave her door. That's my grandma Pearl, Renee whispered. That's my great-grandmother. She fed people. My daddy used to say she'd give away her last plate before she'd let somebody go without. She looked up at Sal, tears running freely now. She did that. She gave somebody her coat. She gave it to my mother, Sal said. 60 years ago. On this street. My mother kept it her whole life so she'd never forget. He took her hands. Renee, the night you sat down beside me, you didn't know who I was. And I didn't know who you were. But your grandmother saved my mother's life with a coat and a hot meal, and 3 generations later, with no idea any of it ever happened, you tore your last sandwich in half for her son. His voice broke. It was never chance. It was in you the whole time. It came down to you. Renee held the old photograph against her chest, the 2 laughing girls, the kitchen, the street, and she understood that the love in her family had traveled 60 years across a city to find its way home. They were married in the spring, in the park, on a clear bright afternoon, near the bench where it all began. It was not a grand wedding, though Sal could have filled a cathedral. Renee wanted the park, and the people who mattered, and so that was what they had. Camille stood beside Renee in royal blue. Frank stood beside Sal, gruff and proud and dabbing at his eyes when he thought nobody was looking. Hank Dolan catered it himself and would not take $1 for it. Old Mr. Whitfield came in his best suit. The Garcia children threw flower petals. And Joy, 6 years old and serious about it, walked down the aisle in a yellow dress carrying a small crooked paper bird, the daddy bird, which she gave to Sal at the front, the same way she had given it to him the first night. "This time it's real," she told him solemnly. "You're the daddy bird now." Sal Russo, who had buried his mother and built the tallest tower in the city and lived in it alone, knelt down in the grass and held a crooked paper bird and a little girl in a yellow dress, and he was not a rich man in that moment or a powerful one. He was just a man who had finally come home. They built something together, after that. It was Renee's idea, born from the work she had been doing all along. They called it Pearl's Table, after her great-grandmother, and they put it everywhere they could reach. It started as one kitchen on Mercer Street, in the same storefront where Pearl had fed the neighborhood 60 years before, and it served a hot meal to anyone who walked through the door, money or no money, no questions asked, exactly the way Pearl had done it. Then it became 2 kitchens, then 5, then 20 across the city, and then it spread to other cities the way good things spread when somebody with means decides to stop counting and start giving. Pearl's Table did more than feed people. It found them jobs, the way Renee had been found. It paid rents that were one bad week from breaking a family, the way Renee's had been broken. It fought, quietly and lawfully, with patient accountants and honest inspectors, against the men who squeezed the poor out of their homes, the way they had fought Gerald Voss. Within 5 years, Pearl's Table had fed hundreds of thousands of people and put roofs back over thousands of families, and not one of them was ever made to feel small for taking what was offered, because the woman who ran it had once been on the worst day of her own life with $4 and a hungry child, and she remembered exactly how it felt. Renee never stopped working. Sal once offered, gently, to let her rest, to never lift another finger as long as she lived. She laughed at him. "And do what?" she said. "Sit in a tower." "No, Sal. My grandmother fed people until the day she died. I come from feeders. You married into it. Get used to it." Joy grew up in a warm home with 2 parents who loved her and a great-grandmother she had never met but knew everything about, because the kitchen had her name on it and the story got told at every dinner table they ever sat at. She grew up knowing that her mother had given away her last meal to a stranger on the worst day of her life, and that the whole shape of their lives had grown out of that one small act of kindness. She grew up believing, all the way down, that kindness was never wasted, that it traveled further than anyone could see, that it came back around in ways nobody could predict. She was right. On the anniversary of his mother's death, every year, Sal still kept his old promise. But he did not walk the streets alone anymore in torn clothes looking for one kind person in a cold city. He had stopped needing to look. He spent the day instead at Pearl's Table on Mercer Street, in a bright warm kitchen, beside his wife and his daughter, handing out hot plates to anyone who came through the door hungry, money or no money, asking them nothing. One cold evening, late in the day, an old man in a worn coat shuffled in out of the gray, the kind of man the rest of the city had looked through all day. Joy, grown taller now, brought him a plate without being asked, set it down in front of him, and sat down beside him so he would not have to eat alone. Across the warm room, Renee watched her daughter and felt her great-grandmother's hands in her own, 60 years of kindness coming down through the line and going right back out the door into the cold where it was needed. Sal came up beside her and put his arm around her, and they stood together watching their girl feed a stranger, and neither of them needed to say a word. Outside, the city was cold and bright and full of people in a hurry. Inside, at Pearl's Table, nobody ever went to bed hungry, and nobody ever ate alone.